What if everything you think you know about narcissistic personality disorder is completely backwards? In the next few minutes, you'll hear about a college basketball star who simply disappeared the day the gym went dark, a startup founder who went from "I am a generational genius" to "my girlfriend will leave me over my hairline in the span of a few days," a man who watched his 8-year-old friend scream in agony on a playground and felt only anger because the screaming was ruining his playtime, and a chilling admission from a diagnosed man who wanted a wife and kids, in his own words, as a disguise to look human. All of it comes from clinical case studies and raw, first-hand accounts from people actually diagnosed with NPD. And it all points to one uncomfortable truth. Behind the grandiosity, there is no excess of self-love. There is a void where a self should be. So let's look at what it actually feels like to live with narcissistic personality disorder entirely from the inside. Picture a narcissist. You're probably imagining a vain, overly confident jerk who just loves themselves a little too much, someone snapping selfies all the time, or, demanding the best table at a restaurant, talking over everyone at a meeting. But what if it's not actually about self-love at all, but this terrifying, exhausting lack of a self? The popular image we all carry around is all about excess. Too much ego, too much confidence, taking up too much space. But the reality, when you actually look at the clinical data and the direct lived experiences of people diagnosed with NPD, it's all about a deficit, a void. There is just this total emptiness where a core identity should be. To really grasp what that void feels like, you have to understand the foundational reality of NPD. Think about how you go through your day. Most people have this steady internal sense of, I am okay. Even when things go wrong, you have this internal baseline. It's like a car battery inside you that just stays relatively charged. You might have a bad day or someone might criticize your work and that battery dips. It hurts a bit, but your body naturally recharges it because you have an internal alternator. You have a core sense of who you are. If you bomb a presentation at work, you feel terrible for a few hours, but you know you're still a good friend or a decent guitar player or just inherently worthy of existing. The alternator kicks in and recharges your battery. But for a person with NPD, that internal machinery is completely broken. They do not have an alternator. Their battery drains almost instantly, and crucially, they can't generate their own charge. The only way they can feel okay, or even feel like they physically exist, is by using jumper cables on someone else. They have to plug into the outside world to survive. They need praise, attention, or even fear and envy from other people just to keep their battery from dying. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because that grandiosity we all see on the outside, the bragging, the arrogance, the obsession with status, it's not actually confidence. It is a desperate survival mechanism to get that outside charge. So let's look at what happens when that mechanism is working, and more importantly, at the absolute devastation that happens when it collapses. That survival mechanism is what psychologists call the false self, because there is no solid working self on the inside generating a sense of worth. The individual has to build this grand fake image, a character they play. They construct this perfect, untouchable persona, maybe the smartest guy in the room, the most beautiful woman at the party, the untouchable boss. And then they project it out into the world to see how people react. And they need that reaction like they need oxygen. They need what the clinical literature calls narcissistic supply. When you reflect that perfect image back to them, when you applaud them, obey them, or even just look at them with intense jealousy, they feel this huge surge of power. Their battery charges up. But without that external supply, they don't just feel a little insecure. The first-hand accounts describe a very literal feeling of disappearing into a void. They describe feeling annulled, like they're actually dissolving into non-existence. There's a medical case study that illustrates this perfectly. A patient referred to as Mr. A highly successful college basketball player, an absolute star on campus. But after he graduated, he couldn't go pro. He had to leave the team, take off the jersey, and get a completely ordinary entry-level corporate job. And the case study notes, he didn't just miss playing the sport. He fell into this total, paralyzing emptiness. Without the role of star athlete walking around campus having people whisper about him, there was literally nothing underneath. When the gym went dark, he just disappeared. Because who they are depends entirely on the role they're currently playing for the specific audience in front of them. It's like being an actor who only exists when the audience is clapping. Take away the audience, take away the script, and they are left in a fog. They don't know who they are when they are alone in a room. They just adapt. They morph depending on the situation, like a chameleon changing colours, perfectly adapting to whatever will extract the most validation from the people around them. But here's the paradox that's hard to wrap your head around. They have this terrifying void inside, basically zero core sense of self, yet they are also capable of orchestrating this incredibly complex, highly calculating false self that can perfectly manipulate a room. How can an empty void be that strategic? The answer is the intellect and the observation skills are highly developed, but they're entirely divorced from a core identity. It's pure survival instinct, and it is utterly exhausting, having to constantly scan a room to see if people are buying the performance, never getting to just take off the costume. The internal accounts describe an intense, unrelenting paranoia. For a person with NPD, socializing isn't relaxing. Getting a coffee with a friend isn't a break. It is a high adrenaline covert mission. One diagnosed individual described feeling like an alien amongst other humans. Even in a crowded, friendly room, they feel completely isolated because they aren't connecting. They're just analyzing, scanning every single face, analyzing every slight shift in tone of voice, constantly asking themselves, do they respect me? Are they looking at my shoes? Was that a slight? Am I winning this interaction or losing it? Think about how exhausting a high-stakes job interview is. Your heart is beating fast. You're monitoring every single word you say. Now imagine that is your baseline reality for every social interaction, forever. Their focus becomes a laser beam on extracting that supply. The rest of reality just falls away. Their body literally gets tense, almost slipping into a chronic fight or flight state. It's a constant high-stakes battle to keep the battery from dying. So if they are putting that much effort into the performance and they view validation as literally life or death, what happens when they actually get it? If someone tells them they're a genius, do they finally feel full? Does the battery stay charged? They do feel full, but only temporarily. Getting praise or admiration creates this massive, intoxicating high. The accounts describe it as feeling invincible, completely unstoppable, on top of the world. Psychologists note that it almost mimics the mania of bipolar disorder. But because they lack that internal alternator to hold on to the charge, the high burns off incredibly fast. It functions exactly like an addiction. The effect of the praise just gets shorter and shorter. A compliment that used to sustain them for a week now barely lasts an hour. Nothing is ever enough. One individual in the literature noted that even with a healthy family, a solid marriage, and plenty of financial success, they actually felt it just wasn't enough. There's always a hole, a constant gnawing dissatisfaction. Because they could never feel satiated, they would internally punish themselves for feeling empty, which resulted in this deep, lingering misery that eventually leaked out and hurt everyone closest to them. Because under the highs, under the bragging, and under the grandiosity, at the very core of this disorder is an emotion most people would never ever associate with narcissism, and that is shame. Shame acts like a hypersensitive smoke alarm for someone with NPD. They rarely show it. They usually hide it under a thick layer of coldness, arrogance, or condescension. But it is always there, humming in the background, waiting to be triggered by the absolute smallest hint of criticism or rejection. And there's another clinical case that perfectly illustrates this. A young startup founder called Mr. B. He comes into his first therapy session acting incredibly cocky, bragging about how he's going to make a 30 under 30 list, name-dropping investors, total grandiosity. But then just 2 sessions later, the therapist notes he is completely spiraling. He collapsed over seemingly trivial insecurities. He was terrified his girlfriend was going to leave him because of his receding hairline, or because he wouldn't have enough clever jokes to keep her entertained at a dinner party. That swing is wild, going from I'm a generational genius destined to change the world to I am an utter fraud and my girlfriend is going to abandon me over my hair in the span of a few days. It reveals how incredibly fragile the false self actually is. It's a mansion built on quicksand. And this brings us to how they process criticism. Think about the last time you felt a deep, humiliating sense of shame. Your face gets hot, your stomach drops, you just want the floor to swallow you whole. Now imagine that feeling lurking just 1 millimeter below the surface of your skin at all times. For someone with NPD, because their entire sense of self is borrowed from the outside, a criticism isn't just feedback on a project. It feels like an attack on their very right to exist. It feels like being told they are fundamentally worthless. If their self-esteem is truly that fragile, a mundane critique at work wouldn't just sting, it would feel like a literal threat to their life. So the brain performs this terrifying survival trick. It instantly converts that agonizing, helpless shame into powerful rage. Researchers literally call this being shamed into anger. Shame is too painful to sit with. It makes you feel weak, exposed, and vulnerable. But rage feels good. Rage feels proactive. It feels powerful. If given the subconscious choice, the human brain will choose to feel powerful over feeling helpless every single time. That explains the explosive reactions people associate with narcissism, the sudden contempt, the cruel belittling. It's not because they think the criticism is silly. It's because the criticism hurts so profoundly that they have to destroy the person who delivered it in order to survive the feeling. It is an overwhelming, instantaneous defense mechanism. But recognizing this mechanism raises a really uncomfortable question. If your entire survival depends on extracting validation from others and protecting yourself at all costs from feeling worthless, how do you actually view those other people? If you need to plug your jumper cables into someone just to feel like you exist, they aren't really a complex, separate human being to you anymore. They become an appliance, a function. People in the lives of those with NPD often become reduced to sources of praise, sources of status, or sources of comfort. Just functions. It isn't necessarily that the individual sits down in a dark room and maliciously plots to be cruel to their friends. It is that their own internal need for supply is screaming so loudly, the alarm bells of their own insecurity are so deafening, that it completely drowns out the reality of the other person's humanity. There is a story in the first-hand accounts that perfectly captures this. A diagnosed man is looking back at a memory from when he was 8 years old on the playground. His friend falls off the monkey bars right next to him and violently cracks his arm. The friend is on the ground, holding his bones, screaming in absolute agony, a horrific injury for a kid. And the man, reflecting on his 8-year-old self, remembers feeling angry. He did not care about the pain. He was mad because his friend's screaming was ruining their playtime. The pain was just an inconvenience. It is a chilling example, but it perfectly illustrates what a lack of emotional empathy actually looks like from the inside. And this was a genuinely surprising realization. You would think a lack of empathy means you are socially dense, like you cannot read the room, like you literally do not notice people are sad. But reading these accounts, it becomes clear they do notice. It is just that other people's pain does not register as important. It registers as static noise or as an obstacle in their way. That distinction is crucial. It is the difference between cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. Cognitive empathy is understanding feelings like a math problem. Think of it like a computer following a set of programmed rules without actually feeling the instinct behind the rule. One recovering individual explained it this way. They know that flirting with someone else at a party hurts their partner. They do not understand why it hurts. They do not feel that visceral guilt in their gut when they see their partner cry. But they remember the algorithm. Action A causes result B. Result B means my partner yells at me, which is bad for my comfortable life. Therefore, I will not do action A. They understand the emotions intellectually as data points, but they do not catch the emotion themselves. It is completely sterile. And then there is a darker variation, what experts call cold empathy. This is the ability to read people perfectly. They can scan a room and know exactly what you are feeling, what your hidden insecurities are, what you desperately desire, but instead of using that information to connect with you, they use it to extract supply. They weaponize it. They can play the role of the most compassionate, listening friend in the world if it wins them praise and trust. But they are not genuinely experiencing the compassion. If you have ever been on the receiving end of that cold empathy, it is incredibly disorienting, devastating even. Imagine watching everyone around you speak a language you only half know and having to fake fluency your entire life. And if they view people purely as functions, it raises a huge question about romantic relationships. How do they love? Does the concept of love even exist if you cannot see the other person as separate from yourself? Well, they absolutely can attach to people. They can deeply want someone and they can feel an intense, overwhelming emotion that they would call love. But their version of love is inextricably tangled up with what the partner does for their self-image. It is a mirror. Do you make me look good to my peers? Do you admire me constantly? Do you make me feel real? Which explains the mechanics of that infamous relationship cycle called love bombing, devaluation, and discard. Looking at it from the inside, the love bombing phase, where they idolize you, sweep you off your feet, and shower you with intense attention, is not a calculated trick. In the moment, it is genuinely intensely felt, but it is driven by the high of the new. A new person who admires them unconditionally is the most potent supply there is. They are high on the mirror. They idealize the partner because of how perfect the partner makes them feel. You are a flawless mirror reflecting a flawless God. But nobody can be a perfect mirror forever. Eventually you sneeze or you have a bad day or you ask them to do the dishes. The partner gets comfortable, they have their own needs, their own boundaries, or maybe they offer a mild, loving criticism, and suddenly the mirror cracks. The supply weakens, and when that happens, the emptiness, that terrifying void, creeps back in. They start to intensely resent the partner, feeling almost as if the partner is maliciously stealing something from them by not being perfectly admiring anymore. That is the devaluation phase, the sudden coldness, the picking fights, and then the discard is just the logical next step. Moving on quickly to find a new shiny source of supply to fix the dying battery before the void completely swallows them. One of the most striking admissions from these accounts came from a diagnosed man discussing his past relationships. He bluntly stated that he wanted a wife and kids, quote, as a disguise to look human. It is a brutal, chilling admission, but it reveals the deeply paranoid core of the disorder. Many individuals with NPD secretly believe that the world is inherently hostile. They believe that all human relationships are essentially a cold war over who gets hurt, used, or abandoned first. So if they're aware of this cycle, if they know they're using people as a disguise, why do they keep doing it? Is this just calculated evil? Do they enjoy the manipulation? Some behavior is highly calculated, yes, but it is rarely a master plan of comic book evil. It is driven by sheer panic, unacknowledged shame, and a desperate, clawing need to survive. Emotionally, it is fear-based, completely. If you fundamentally believe that everyone will eventually betray you, use you, or hurt you, manipulating them first does not feel like abuse to the disordered mind. It feels like necessary self-defense. Which begs the ultimate question, where does a worldview that dark, that paranoid even come from? No one is born thinking the world is a war zone where they have to fake their own humanity. The clinical research and the personal accounts almost universally point back to one place: emotionally broken childhoods. Trauma. We consistently see patterns of severe neglect, emotional or physical abuse, or highly conditional love. A child growing up in an environment where parents are unpredictable or demanding learns one of two tragic lessons. Either I am only safe from harm when I am exceptional and perfect, or my feelings are punished, therefore having needs is a weakness. So the child realizes the real, messy, vulnerable version of them is not welcome or safe, and they construct the grand false self just to survive their family dynamic. But decades later, the family is gone, and that survival strategy becomes a prison. The psychological coping mechanism that brilliantly saved their life at age 6 completely destroys their life at age 36. But here is a question. If the entire architecture of order is built to protect them from self-awareness, If the false self deflects all criticism and blames everyone else, how does someone with NPD ever actually get diagnosed? Would they not just deny it and blame the therapist forever? Most do. The vast majority never see the inside of a therapist's office voluntarily, but the ones who do get diagnosed usually arrive there through what the field calls a narcissistic collapse. It is a total, catastrophic breakdown of the false image. It usually takes a massive, undeniable public crisis that they cannot spin their way out of. Going to prison for fraud, a highly public professional failure, a sudden unwanted divorce where they lose all their assets and status. There is no escaping the reality. The false image simply cannot hold the reality of the failure at bay anymore, and it shatters. And what is underneath that shattered mask is not a quiet, reflective sadness. It is absolute despair. Many are only diagnosed after a hospitalization or a suicide attempt. It is only in the depths of that agonizing collapse that they finally accept the label, because the pain of the void is finally too great to ignore. So what does this all mean for the people who actually get the diagnosis, survive the collapse, and try to get help? Can this be fixed? Can you build an alternator for someone who does not have one? Therapy for NPD is notoriously incredibly difficult. Remember, the disorder is fundamentally about a severe malfunction in how they relate to other people. And therapy is a relationship. So they bring all those defenses, the paranoia, the need to feel superior, right into the therapy room. The illness actively attacks the cure. Patients with NPD will often relentlessly criticize the therapist, refuse to do the actual emotional work, or demand a new doctor the moment they feel intellectually challenged. They fiercely resist the vulnerability required to heal, because vulnerability feels like death to the false self. But change is possible. The accounts show people in remission who are deeply self-aware. Still, it is vital for both the patient and their loved ones to understand that recovery is not a cure. It is management. It requires years, often decades, of unglamorous, repetitive, intensely difficult work. The internal feelings of emptiness, the sudden spikes of rage, and the craving for external supply often stay with them for life. What changes is the behavior. They learn to manage those impulses so they do not harm others. They cannot necessarily fix the void, but they can stop throwing other people into it. They learn to find pro-social ways to get their needs met. For instance, turning that intense need for attention into something helpful, like making educational videos about their disorder or excelling in a demanding career, rather than destroying a partner's self-esteem at home just to feel powerful, turning the need into a tool instead of a weapon. To close, it is crucial to bust a couple of major myths. First, they are not happy. The grandiosity is just a shield. One person in the accounts called the disorder a daily torture, comparing it to a trial that never ends where you do not even know what the charges are. And second, not everyone who is a jerk to you or selfish is a narcissist. True NPD is a specific severe medical diagnosis affecting roughly 1 to 6% of the population. And one crucial disclaimer: understanding the childhood trauma and the deep pain behind NPD humanizes the people suffering from it. It helps us see them as struggling humans. But it is not a free pass. Not at all. The harm they cause to partners, children, and friends is very real and often devastating. Healthy boundaries are absolutely necessary. If you have someone like this in your life, you cannot fix them. You cannot love someone into self-awareness, and you cannot fix their broken battery for them, no matter how much of your own energy you sacrifice. The emotional weight of this entire topic is staggering when you really sit with it. The mask of NPD is incredibly heavy. To wake up every single day and perform a perfect, flawless self, while constantly scanning the room for threats, terrified that at any moment someone will see the empty void inside you. It is a profoundly lonely way to exist. And this raises an important question for all of us to consider, even those without the diagnosis. In a modern world that increasingly rewards us, through social media, through corporate ladders, for building grand, perfect false selves online, how much of our own true, messy selves are we suppressing just to get a daily supply of applause? And what happens to us when the applause stops?